Hey, welcome back, fans. Welcome back, Knicks fans. Today's a special day. For the most part, since I started this channel, I've always been on my own. Never had a guest, but today's a special day because we have a guest today. His name is Andre. He's also a Knicks fan. And Andre, why don't you greet the fans?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, this is I appreciate the invite. Just to let you guys know, yeah, my name is Andre. Originally from New Jersey. I've been a diehard Knicks fan and been following the Knicks fan. Following the Knicks closely. Oh God, since I would say roughly 1985. So I've seen quite a few different eras.
So, what would you say was your favorite Knicks team since you started watching? Which era
Oh,
did you like the
no,
best?
yeah, that's a good question. I think each era brought something different, a different dynamic. If we look at, one of my, I would say the I'm thinking about it. Okay, the 1990. Let's start with my. I have three eras. Okay, we'll start with the era, my Carmelo era.
Okay.
Okay, so that was roughly 2012, 2013. I felt that team. That was the team that won in the playoffs. That first series, the last series that we actually won, beating Boston 4-2, and we had a lot of season vets on there: Jason Kidd, Kurt Thomas. Uh, we had quite a bit. And I just felt like that. I felt that year we could have had a turning point. I thought we had the right coach, we had the right system, everything was in place. Unfortunately, those veterans got hurt. I think that's kind of really limited us in that playoff series. So that was, one decade.
Okay.
I would say then my second era would be that 1998-99, where the Knicks were the eighth seed,
Okay.
and that was that lockout year, if you remember. Uh, and it was, no one saw the Knicks coming. They barely made the eighth seed, and then they just, they were able to beat, I believe it was Miami 3-2,
Yep.
who, knocking out the first seed. And I think that was the first time that an eighth seed had ever made it all the way to the NBA Finals.
That's true.
Uh, so, beating the Hawks 4-0 and the Pacers 4-2, and then eventually um, losing to the Spurs 4-1. And so I think that year, that's where we got a good look at Latrell Sprewell. We got a really good look at Allen Houston. And those are those key players at that particular time. And so it was really, really exciting to watch. No one saw us coming. It was a great time to be a Knicks fan. And then I believe my all-time favorite would be that 1993-94 Knicks. I believe they won 57 games that year. That was the Oakley, the Starks, the Ewan, the Mason, uh, Harper, which I thought was the true glue of that team. And
Okay.
I thought that team, uh, you know, I it was that we were up. I believe it was three to two, and unfortunately, John Stark shot his way shot us right out of the playoffs. And I get, you live and die with Starks, but at some point, I felt Pat Riley, if he would have made some critical adjustments at that juncture, I think we could have finally, had an opportunity to see the Knicks win a championship.
Yeah, I definitely remember that one as well. It's so funny you talk about Pat Riley not being flexible in that moment, making the
Mhm.
adjustment. Because I remember we did have Rolando Blackman on the bench. I think we also still had Hubert Davis. But it's just really interesting to hear you talk about that because it's sort of similar to the struggle I think Nick fans have with Tibbs right now. He's probably less flexible than Pat Riley was, probably.
Right.
But yeah, it's really interesting because coaches, I guess they definitely can be really stubborn. So that's really interesting to hear. What do you
Well,
think?
yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, yeah, you're absolutely right. And if you think about where Tibbs came from Jeff Van Gundy's tree. And what tree did Jeff Van Gundy come from? Pat Riley. So you see the correlation?
True. That is true. That is definitely true. Yep. So it's crazy. The other thing I noticed that you talk, when you talk about these errors, it does make me think about we've had moments where we've had the right coach and the right team, but then we just never really had the right front office. And I'd never really paid a ton of attention to the Knicks front office when I was younger, like with those '90s team, like the early '90s and then the late '90s team. I really only started paying attention to the front office more around like around when Isaiah Thomas first started. That's when I really first started paying attention to like the front office for the New York Knicks. But it's we've never been able to really put it together where we've had like competent front office along with like competent coach and a good team. It's always been some issue. You go back to like that early '90s squad. I know there's an interview that Xavier McDaniels did uh, with I think it was Nick Fan TV. He talked a lot about basically him not being able to stay with the Knicks and how that happened. And it's just like just to think about it. I remember that series that they took the Bulls to like Game 7. I mean, it's almost like all they had to do was just keep Xavier McDaniels. Try to keep that team a little, keep it another 2 years. I think they would have basically gave the Bulls probably a better run. And then in the late '90s, I'm not really sure. I didn't really understand the front office very. I didn't really observe what they were doing, but I just remember Patrick Ewing getting traded, and then also Latrell Sprewell leaving, and then also Coach Van Gundy leaving. That always felt like the death of the team. I remember back then it really felt like the death of a team. That was really tough to watch. And then, of course, the Carmelo Anthony era. That was just that whole front office. Even prior to when he got there, it's sometimes I think we kind of give too much credit to some front offices because, for example, that front office with Donnie Walsh, I think it was Donnie Walsh, well, the guy from Indiana who came over.
Yeah,
I mean, he
yeah.
basically
It was
just,
Wash. Uh-huh.
yeah, all he did was just strip down the team, right? It's like, I always felt like anyone can just, shed salaries and then lose a bunch of games. And for me, that was always like, I always felt like, um, I guess maybe because they felt like Isaiah Thomas was so bad in terms of like not prioritizing draft picks. But even with Donald Walsh, it wasn't even like, I don't even think he really prioritized draft picks that much. I think he was trying to build through, really through free agency because we didn't do a that great of a job drafting during his era. And then we just shedded a bunch of salary. That was pretty much it. And then we got Stat. And then, against Donnie Walsh's wishes, um, we also got Carmelo, and so that was very interesting era too. But I've always felt like it never matched up. And then after that one playoff season we had with Melo, well, actually it was like we had like three, I think it was like three playoff season with him. But we had that like I guess the 2013 season, was it 2013 that we went to the second round and got beat by the Pacers. Um,
Yeah, that was the
yeah,
13.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And then after that, everything just kind of fell apart, and it was because they just never really had a good front office. So it's because they went in and got
Well,
Bargnani. So
yeah, they made a lot of errors, in even that Carmelo went into the Phil Jackson era.
yeah,
And I think Phil Jackson did so much damage because again he comes from that '80s coaching fraternity of being stubborn and not adapting and forcing the triangle.
yeah,
And we missed out on Donovan Mitchell because he picked up Frank Ntilikina, who he
true,
felt could run the triangle.
yeah,
And so that's going to haunt the Knicks forever. That was a golden opportunity. They've interviewed. I remember they've interviewed Donovan Mitchell as well as worked him out. I think there was some questions about him health wise during that draft,
Okay.
but it wasn't enough to not pick him.
Yeah.
And I believe Phil Jackson was let go within about a week of the draft.
Yeah, I remember
After about a
that.
week after that draft, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that because it just got so bad
Mm.
between him and Melo, and it wasn't even like two side. I remember I really Melo really earned my respect. I really like Melo a lot, especially after what he went through with Phil Jackson. I mean, he was like the ultimate professional. I mean, Phil Jackson was like dragging his name through the mud, through the media,
Absolutely.
and he just kind of like kept it professional, never said anything bad about the organization. So I've always appreciated Melo for that. The one thing with Melo, I just always I mean, after I kind of learned who Melo was and how he played, like because he wasn't going to be a defensive stopper, he wasn't going to be a two-way player like LeBron was. Then the other thing too was like I always kind of felt like he wasn't the same kind of leader that would like kind of demand a lot from his teammates for the most part. He's almost like he basically leads by example for the most part, and he's gonna leave it up to, I mean, these are grown men, and so he's gonna leave it up to them to do the right thing, right? And so I always kind of appreciated him too. I just that front office, they just were never able to build. They just were able to build around him for that one season, and that was it. And then they just never were able to repeat it. And so that was the biggest problem
Absolutely.
with Melo. What do the interesting, I wanted to ask you about the trade. So it's always
Okay.
interesting when people think about that Melo trade. I mean, we essentially traded Carmelo. I mean, the guys we traded him for at the time during that season, they were talented players, and it was a
Sure.
lot. However, if you look at their the course of their career, it's like these guys barely play like 50% of each season. With Gallinari, maybe like 40% of the season he will play. So it honestly it felt like, and then also I think they gave up maybe two first round picks for Melo on top of all those players, and it just felt
Right.
like honestly it felt more like a fleet. Like you kind of look back on it, it feels like the Knicks fleeced the Denver Nuggets, at least in my opinion, because those players that we traded away never even played. None of them ever played a full season, and none of them even like I think Gallinari the most he probably ever played was maybe 60 games, and it was like maybe 2 seasons he did that. And so it's like, but what do you think about that whole trade? Because in the moment it felt like we were giving up way too much, but in hindsight now it feels like we gave them gave them all like people the term people like to use is like giving up players for a bag of balls. Like, what did you think about that whole trade?
Right. Initially, well, I wanted Carmelo. I felt like at that time the Knicks were, I believe, 2 games over 500,
Yeah.
and so they were kind of like teetering around, possibly being a maybe, maybe an eighth seed. Uh, and at that time, Amari Stoudemire was the face of the team. And if you remember, Amari never wanted Carmelo.
Mm.
He was against the trade. And I was always skeptical about that, of just signing Amari Stoudemire. I felt
Yeah.
like uh, giving him a 5-year deal, someone who is injury prone. I said, I felt like he would give us too strong, 2 years. The third would be a little murky, and I felt we were having to deal with health issues with him.
Yeah.
I just felt that, uh, and lo and behold, but I do feel like believe in that trade. We ended up getting Sheldon Williams, Chauncey Billups, Anthony Carter. Sorry, Anthony Carter, and I believe Rolando Balkman.
Yeah.
And we traded with Wilson Chandler, which I was a big fan of Wilson Chandler. I thought he was a great role player. Like he
Yeah.
was never going to be a star, but he would be a great guy coming off the bench.
Yeah.
Raymond Felton was playing pretty well. He had good chemistry with Amari Stoudemire at the time, and Gallinari was a rising. possibly potential star, especially working in D'Antoni system. Timothy, Timothy Moskov, I never knew exactly what he was going to develop into, so I wasn't that hesitant. Um, and then we did give up, I believe it was, 2 draft picks. So at the time, I felt we should have never amnestied Chauncey Billups.
Oh yeah, I agree
I
with
thought
that.
Chauncey was still playing some good ball, right?
Yeah.
And I never understood that decision. I never understood that decision at that time. But in hindsight, we it appeared that we gave up quite a bit. But when I look at it, I'm like, I would have still done that trade. And Melo forced that trade, to be honest.
Yeah.
He could have easily just waited to the end of the year, and the Knicks could have signed them and not give up any of those players. But Melo forced the situation, and I believe if the Knicks did not make the trade, Brooklyn he would have signed with. They would have made a trade with Brooklyn.
Yeah, because I remember the big thing back then too was because of the there was going to be a lockout because they had to get like all new contracts. I guess new they were supposed to get new deals with like the owners, and so I think it had more to do with like making sure, and they thought the salary cap was going to go down or something like that, and so he wanted to make sure like something about his salary was grandfathered in because I think they were saying with the new structure that he would probably get less if he just waited till free agency. So he wanted to make sure he got as much money as he could. Because I think was it a signing like basically where he was once he did he come was he traded to the Knicks then he extended right away or it might have been something with the deal where it was like if you were traded it's like everything I guess your grandfathered in like but if you wait to that following season or something like that there was a possibility he would have gotten less money. I can't remember all the details, but I think it had the reason why he forced it because it had more to do with like his money, making sure he got the most he could. Um,
Absolutely.
The
Yeah,
following
absolutely.
season.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think because Melo forced that trade, he was titled with being selfish, a selfish player.
Yeah.
But I felt like he took all the smoke that came with being in a big market. He took it on the chin. Yeah. He never ran away from the press, and that was something that's I truly believe that was the first time we had since Patrick Ewing days a true bona fide star.
True.
Like this guy was a star player in the league, and we're starving for that now, right? Yeah. We are craving, and I think that's what kind of hurt so much with the Donovan Mitchell trade, not happening because he is a bona fide star. We hope that RJ can develop into that person, and he definitely has the drive and the work ethics, and we just have to see.
Yeah, I agree with you. Good thing you're bringing up RJ, so it's a good segue to kind of like come back into this era. Obviously, it basically started with them basically finally being able to draft a player, who could possibly become a star in RJ Barrett. RJ Barrett, I mean, he's had his struggles, the first 3 years, and mostly with it's just really his efficiency. We've seen improvements every year. Last year, the improvement, in my opinion, that I saw with RJ Barrett was more with playmaking because we were able to run plays through him. And the one thing I noticed about him that's really good is not only is he able to he can basically find you in the perimeter, make plays for his team, like basically find a way to collapse the defense, and then like swing the ball out to the perimeter for a 3-point shot. In my opinion, I think that's the easiest part. I think that's very easy. I think the hardest part is like the kind of playmaker that can actually get his teammates layup because a layup is the easiest shot you can get. And time again, when we run the offense through RJ, like the one thing I really like about him, he constantly get a lot of our guys layups. especially the big men. Like you see when Taj Gibson is on the floor, like whether if it's Taj or Mitchell Robinson, or not so much with Obi, but it was mostly with like Taj and Mitchell Robinson. But he was constantly getting these guys like wide open layups, and I just thought, that was a big improvement he made last year. However, his efficiency was really bad, and I felt that him like I felt like trying to force to get to the 20 points per game, in my opinion, was to the detriment of his team. If you're basically averaging 20 points per game on 40% shooting, I mean, like your team is not going to win a lot of games. And so we had him and Randall averaging 20 points on like 40% shooting. And so that really, I felt like that was one of the biggest things that kind of, dragged the team down. And of course, also the lack of defense. But what do you see about RJ? What do you like about him, and how do you think he's progressing?
I think he is I see the maturation in RJ, and I see that drive. And RJ is not shying away from the media as well. And he'll say something, a little smart alecky or whatever, but it's more playful.
Yeah.
But I feel like he has the tools, and I believe what I like about him is he plays with a chip on his shoulder.
Yes.
I feel like every time he gets snubbed from an All-Star game, or first team this or second team whatever, he takes it personally, and he's like, he's going to work harder. Everything that we criticized RJ about, you can see him improving. You're not going to all of a sudden turn the switch on the next day and just be great. But it's a natural maturation, and so I am really excited about RJ, to see what he's going to do next.
Yeah.
To see him take that next step. I think having what's our the coach that came from Utah.
Johnny Bryant.
I can't think of his name. Johnny Bryant. Mm-hmm. I think having Johnny Bryant close to him, because if you think about it, if you remember, Johnny Bryant is the same guy who worked closely with Donovan.
Yes.
And so it just takes time. And unfortunately, as being Knicks fans, we want instant gratification, right? We want someone to come out from day one and just be explosive. And if they're not, we're ready to trade him. Now, so what's going to be really interesting this year, what we really got to keep an eye on now that RJ has signed the extension. So now what happens when you sign a big extension in New York? It comes with higher expectations.
Yeah, all eyes are going to be on him.
Exactly. So a lot of things that we kind of let slide, some things we kind of like, okay, he's still young, he's still developing. And that's another thing. I mean, what is RJ, 21?
Yeah, actually, he's 22 now. Just turned 22 recently.
Oh, he's 22? Okay.
Yeah.
So at 22, his ceiling is still really high. And, I think had RJ stayed, one more year at Duke, his game would have been a lot different coming into the league. But I have no regrets drafting. We had to draft RJ.
Yes.
At number 3. There was no way we could miss that opportunity. I think we're going to, with having Jalen Brunson on this team, I think you're going to see a brand new RJ as well. And I think it's going to click for him. I think because what you bring with Jalen Brunson is you bring another coach. He reminds me a lot of Jason Kidd. Mm-hmm. Nothing fancy, but very effective, right? Jason Kidd couldn't blow past anyone,
Yeah.
But he had a knack for finding a way to score. But Jason Kidd also played pretty good defense too. But I do see some signs of Jason Kidd. Jason Kidd and Jalen Brunson. I think you're going to see RJ take that next step.
I agree with you on that, especially with bringing Jalen Brunson in. There was a lot of people basically thought there were a lot of criticism on Jalen Brunson's game because people felt that, okay, now he's going to the Knicks. Let's see what it's like for him to work without a Luka. And a lot of the analysts were saying he basically benefits from basically playing alongside with Luca, and not having Luca is going to be a bigger issue for him because Luca, I guess, is has such a forceful gravity, comes with a lot of gravity, gets a lot of force. But with I because of that, I ended up doing a lot of analysis work on Jalen Brunson. I looked at a lot of the games that he played. He played about 17 games without Luca, and in terms of effectiveness, his production actually actually increased when Luca was not on the floor. But the thing that's also really interesting that I always do, I look at to see how much of an impact the person has on the game. I always look
Sure.
at the person's their net rating, and then I compare it to the margin of victories for each of those games. And so basically, for the 17 games he played without Luca, there's the correlation between his performance and the team's performance was really high. And that's not always a good thing, but it does show when you do see that from a player, that means that player is is basically can be an engine for your offense. That means you can run your offense through that player. And so that's usually what it means when that person have a high correlation. It's not always a good thing for the team, a whole team at large, because that means when you have one player with the correlation between his performance and the team's performance are high, then that means you just got to shut that one person down and the rest of the team folds. And so, and the reason why I think that also happened was because, if you think about that Mavs team, it was just him and Luca. They were the only real bona fide playmakers. They also have Dinwiddie, who's also a playmaker. But but for the most part, it was really just Luca and then Brunson, especially prior to when they got Dinwiddie. And so I do think people were basically discounting his talent and his abilities. And I think I agree with you. I think he's going to be he's gonna be a great addition to the Knicks. As a matter of fact, in some ways, I feel like he's the one signing that's going to end up saving his front office and Tibbs
Absolutely.
because
Absolutely.
yeah, I feel like he's
Yeah.
going to end up masking a lot of issues that Tibbs has, and also a lot of the mistakes the front office has made. Because I think the probability is pretty decent, probably 60% that they basically did win about 41, 42 games. And I think, and the one thing the numbers from looking at least that's what the numbers suggest. When I basically what I did was in order to kind of get to that probability, I ended up swapping out. I essentially just swapped out. I swapped out Burks for. Oops, it says we're running. Okay, I didn't know there was a time limit on this, but it's saying we have 10 minutes left on this. But
Okay.
we may have to pause and kind of reconvene and finish the rest of it.
Okay.
But so essentially, I kind of lost my train of thought. But I think having him here is going to be a really good thing, and I do think he's going to end up masking a lot of the issues that some of the mistakes the front office have made, and also a lot of the issue with Tom Thibodeau. And so we're just going to take a quick break, and then I want to kind of like make sure I get this whole like tech issue together because I don't want us to get cut off, and I'm not that great with the editing. So guys, we'll be
Okay.
back. So just hold on a minute. So, like I said, with Jalen Brunson here, it is going to mask a lot of issues that the front office has. And one of the issues the Knicks have, obviously, is with the coach Tom Thibodeau. What do you think about the job he's done so far with this team? I know he had his struggles last year with the rotations and coming into this season. The front office have gotten rid of a lot of the vets, but we still have Fournier in the team. We still have Julius. Those Julius is not going to be easy to get rid of. Fournier probably is not going to be that easy, but it sounds like they really do like Fournier. And then Derrick Rose is the other veteran that's also going to be getting, hopefully, not too significant of minutes. I'm hoping that Derrick Rose plays honestly 18 to 20 minutes and that's it, because I just feel like if he plays more than that, he may not be able to last the season for the Knicks because he's the one player I think they should really they should try to save him for a playoff run. But what do you think about Tibbs, his performance with the Knicks so far? What do you think his strong suits are, and what do you think he's lacking?
Oh, that's a great question. I think Tibbs, uh, he's, I believe he's been very subpar. And I say that just because you have to save Tibbs from Tibbs, okay? And
True.
that was when we had to get rid of Alex Burke. I feel like Alex Burke was a great six man off the bench. Uh, you can play him, and he's really a two or a three, and he can get hot. But they had to trade him, and it wasn't just for the draft picks. I honestly don't believe it was just for the draft picks. I believe it's because of Tibbs.
Yeah.
Tibbs would have found a way to keep him in the starting lineup, and it's just a detriment to the team. And I feel like Tibbs. I don't know if he's on the hot seat just yet. I'm not 100% sure because he does have a really, really good relationship with Leon Rose.
Yeah.
But I do know there are some front office people who are very disgruntled about the direction and about, especially like not playing Cam Reddish and not being flexible with the rotation. And, he has this mentality of, I'm going to play my veterans and they give us the best chance to win. And you know what? And some nights you are absolutely right. But there are other nights you have a hot hand, you have a quickly, and he's has this hot hand, and you want to pull him.
Yeah.
And it's just like, so I don't feel like Tibbs is the best coach for player development.
Yeah.
And he has not hired anyone outside of Johnny Bryant who I feel comfortable with having, his ear or developing some of our young players. And, again, I feel like the front office, I think the bunch of coach look at him. We giving you the point guard. And I agree with you regarding Derrick Rose. And Derrick Rose is definitely a big piece of what we're trying to do. We do have to have a limited minutes for Derrick Rose. Yeah. I like that 15 minutes is ideal. But I don't be surprised if you see Derrick Rose at times at the shooting guard position alongside Jalen Brunson. Yeah. I would not be surprised because Tibbs doesn't understand, player restrictions and trying to monitor their minutes. He's thinking about trying to win that game. He's not seeing, he's not seeing the future and what could possibly, hurt this team. He's thinking about winning and, keeping his job. He knows if he wins games, he can't fire him. Yeah. This is the job. This was his dream job. He wanted it. It gave it to him. But he must show adjustment. And, initially with Julius Randle, I blamed a lot of, bonehead things that Julius did. The turnovers, the selfish play at times. But in all honesty, it was really Tibbs' fault because Tibbs allowed it. Yeah. Tibbs, he allowed it, And so it all falls back on the coach. And so before this front office is let go, they at least allow you one coach firing. Typically, typically they don't know. They want you to be able to have an opportunity to bring in your guy. Tibbs wants their guy. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, with that part of it, that's where I'm thinking it depends on how the season goes, right? If it's a really bad season where, let's say, the wheels fall off and they're on track to win like 35 games, and the fan base is like really disgruntled and is a little tired of like not just the decisions Tibbs are making, but also honestly, with the especially the way the own Dolan has been operating recently, I mean he's been he's been pretty with the last regime. Like when they did the switchover, he hasn't been firing everyone, but I know with the Rangers, I know I don't pay attention to the Rangers, but it was like the one thing that was actually shocking a couple of seasons ago, he but like got rid of everyone. I think that's the first time I've seen him do something like that. He kind of tends to trim. He's more of a surgeon with it, where he just kind of like cut out the what he thinks is the bad piece. He's the kind. He seems like the kind of guy that just doesn't like to screw people over. He just doesn't like to fire like people just for the sake of firing people, especially with his
Right.
franchises. And so maybe he might take that same approach this time around, like he's always done. But if he takes the approach with the Rangers, like he took, and the Rangers weren't even that bad that season that he got rid of everyone. I mean, like, this front office, I think they might be in danger because the reason why they might be in danger is because they basically haven't been able to control Tibbs, unfortunately. And not just saying like, oh, they control who gets what minutes and how many minutes, but they should be on the same page in terms of like the development of the team and the plan. So if it should be a situation where if the front office feels like development and the future of this team is the most important thing, then Tibbs should be, he should be along with the plan and he should be playing the younger players a little more. But that doesn't seem to be the case. It's just like Tibbs, like you say, he just plays the veterans and he plays whoever he thinks allows him to win the most ball games. The interesting thing with Tibbs is like I realized like at the end of last year um, with the whole debacle when he was playing Burks at the point guard, Tibbs actually looks at analytics quite a bit. And I think the analytics was showing. I think Burks was the one player in the lineup where the net rating for the Knicks were the highest. When he was playing, the
Mm,
net rating for the Knicks were the highest with Burks. But that's the one of those things where sometimes when you look at a lot of these statistics in a vacuum, it can be very misleading, right? Another, sorry, another example is this whole debate between Evan Fournier, Quentin Grimes, and Cam Reddish.
sure.
It kind of reminds me of that because sometimes if you like, there's a lot of players they keep looking at Quentin Grimes. A lot of these like isolated stats, like on a defensive end. There was one person, actually, the Nick of Time show, JLS from the Nick of Time show. He was quoting saying that the isolation statistics for Grimes, I think it was really high. He was like, I think maybe something like 80, maybe 80th percentile or something like that. It was like really good. His isolation defense on the isolation was really good. And but when you go to NBA.com and look at the totality of his defensive efforts, where they basically showed everyone he was matched up against, like how many field goals they took and how many they made and what percentage they shot. It shows that the people he was matched up against, the whole basically opponents were shooting 48% against Grimes. And then on top of that, he's shooting only like 41%. And then to make it even worse, his opponents made 40 more field goals than he did. So if you look at like on every, like when you look at the whole thing as overall, he basically lost his matchups on average every game. When he was on the floor, the people he was guarding outscored him, and then they were also more efficient than he was. That's according to NBA stats. But with the NBA stats, you do have to kind of like it's a little tricky because the way they do tabulate the defensive stats, I don't really agree with. And so, for example, one of the things is like an example is like Julius Randle can let his man just kind of like go. Julius Randle, he would just kind of like open the door for his man, won't even make an effort. And Grimes just happened to be there, and he doesn't have any choice but to challenge the shot. But that goes on Grimes. For me, like last year, when I was tabulating the defensive stats myself, I put that on Julius Randle. I would never put it on like the person who just kind of happened to be there, who's like, okay, he has no choice but to actually help out his teammates. I put it on the person who actually blew the coverage, who decided not to make the effort. And so that's where it gets really murky with a lot of these defensive stats. So that 48% may be a little high, might be higher than it should be. And it's possible that it's probably somewhere more closer to like 45%. But at the end of the day, it's like people look at a lot of times you look at isolated statistics and people it can confuse like I think it will make players look a lot better than they are if you look at statistics in a vacuum. A lot of times I feel like it's better you have to look at the person's overall production. I
Sure.
think that's where like the PIEs are very important for the team, and then also the PERs. I think those are very important because it kind of gives you an overall gauge of the production. It doesn't include the defensive part. You have to find a way to factor in defense, but at least it's like a good place to start. I wanted to ask you about this whole thing with Grimes versus Fournier and Reddish.
Sure.
With so in this situation, I've already kind of described one of the issues with Grimes, and so I have on the screen basically the PIE for all three players. Cam Reddish has the highest PIE. His PIE is 7.9. Quentin Grimes
Okay.
has the lowest. He's at 7, and Fournier has a second highest, and he's at 7.4. And so it's really interesting. What do you think about this whole debate? Who should basically start? The reason why I'm including Cam Reddish, if Cam Reddish was to start, he would not be starting at the 2. He'll be at the 3, and then they slide RJ to the 2. So that's why he's kind of all he. That's why he's lumped into this whole group because they're all sort of battling for a wing spot. What do you think about that whole battle that's playing out, and also how Tibbs he's kind of like he feels like he wants to lean on Fournier right now, and then like these other guys need to knock off Fournier. What do you think about that whole battle?
I well, we know Evan Fournier is a defensive liability,
Yeah.
and I think that's why the fan base feels like, at least with Quentin Grimes, he's going to get the effort. And statistically, it may not show. And you brought up a good point about statistics. Actually, I had a debate yesterday with a good friend of mine who advocates for Julius Randle, and he brought up a statistic that he asked me who was the best defensive player that the Knicks had. So if I look at that statistics, I probably would say Mitch Robinson. And I said, but I'm not 100% sure. And he said, well, it's Julius Randle. If you look at the percentage on ESPN.com, it says, he has the highest percentage. And then it will fall RJ. And I said, well, this is where you have to have the eye test sometimes as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just real quick, let me add something to that real quick. And the reason why his is like it's so good is because a lot of times he doesn't. That's where those statistics are misleading on the defensive end because he doesn't make the effort. He'll let his man like go, and somebody else is basically playing the defense on his man now, and he's just not playing any defense. And so that doesn't go against because like he just let his man walk right into RJ or right into Grimes, that statistic is not put on Julius Randle. It's put on whoever happened to pick up the slack for Julius. I'm sorry, I just wanted to add that in there. That's one of the weak points with like the defensive stats in NBA.
Really? And I'm glad you mentioned that because I had no idea how they developed that particular stat. So thank you because you really educated me on that particular item. And so I feel like it's going to be an interesting battle. I'm looking forward to preseason to see, who's going to be. Well, right now, Grimes, he's in a walking boot.
True.
So he's in a walking boot right now. So which gives Cam Reddish, a time. One thing about Cam Reddish is he has all the tool sets to be great. Yeah. But he has the same issue, the same problem that Kevin Knox had. Just doesn't have the engine.
Yes.
And, and I don't know how, it's one of those things where it's got to be something within within you. That is not, no coach can bring it out. There's no one else can bring that out of you. And so he has all the talent, all the skill set. And I just think he's just, I really want to get a good look at him. I really want him to, when he does get in, I feel like he doesn't necessarily play within the offense. I feel like he is playing as if, hey, I don't know how long I'm going to be in this game, so I'm just going to go for mine, essentially. Yeah. And that's what it feels like to me. Mm-hmm. And I think if he played within the actual offense, I think he would have some really tangible results.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. I just want to go over another stat for these three real quick before I get right into Cam Reddish. So the field goal made differentials. So basically, this is when the people they matched up against. Like, did they outscore the people they were matched up against? Cam Reddish was -2. However, he was more efficient than his opponents. He held when on the Knicks, he holds his opponents to 37% shooting. It's like that's pretty dang low. Then the next person is Grimes. We already talked about Grimes. His opponents made 40 more field goals than he did, and also they were 7%, almost 8 percentage points more efficient than he was. And then Fournier made 33 more field goals than his opponents this year, although he was 5% less efficient. So if you go by this field goal like metrics where you're kind of looking at the efficiency and also the field goals made against their opponents, it kind of looks like Fournier is the way to go. But just getting into Grimes real quick, and that doesn't mean like Quentin Grimes and Reddish can't be better, right? Especially, it doesn't mean that Grimes is not going to be better once he's back healthy again. But just getting into Reddish real quick, I agree with you. Like I've really been debating this right a lot about motor and and the way Cam Reddish plays. And one thing I do know from all listening to a lot of the press conferences, it seems like maybe Reddish was the one person that wasn't there all the time, like a lot of the other players were, because a lot of the other players seemed like they were just in the gym the whole time. And it seemed like maybe Reddish was in the gym earlier in the summer, especially rehabbing, and he worked out some maybe in LA or something like that. But it seems like he was one of the only players that weren't really on his grind over the summer like that. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but it just from the little bit I'm picking up from all the interviews and conversation, it seems like he's like probably one of the few that wasn't like that. And so the motor, from that standpoint, he definitely doesn't fit with the team very well. There has been there's an interview, the guy Knicks Fan TV interviewed Alan Hahn, and that was the topic of the conversation, his motor. And so, but it gets me thinking, like, how sometimes you have people, they won't basically really work hard, right? They won't, like, let's say they won't practice all the time like everyone else does because they just got it, right? But the problem is, I think in the NBA is like the coaches hate that. I'm sorry. And I think probably a lot of other players, at least like, some other players probably don't really like that either. But then sometimes you have to ask yourself, but what if he's effective and he doesn't need to put in the same effort that you have to put in to be effective? It kind of got me asking that kind of question. It's not because like, I'll like Cam Reddish so much, because one thing I really don't like players that don't play with a lot of. I like players that play with motor. So he's not like really my favorite kind of player. I don't really like, I'm not really enthralled by his game. I don't really like his game that. I mean, he's very talented, but because of the whole motor thing, because he doesn't go hard, that I just don't like that. However, but it kind of you have to ask yourself, what if he's effective and he just doesn't have to put in the same effort as everyone does? He's like 6'8", probably like 7'2", some crazy wingspan. Like, what do you think about that? Do you think if he's effective, is there an issue where he can be effective, but people just don't like him because he's not working hard?
Well, I think I would say if he teammates would definitely get behind him as well as the coaching staff. But I feel like it has to translate, right? And so we see quickly, we see Obi, we see a lot of the young guys putting in work. They're in the gym, they're just doing all these things to improve their game. And we see each year it's translating. Their numbers are going up, their efficiencies are going up. We see, marginal improvements. And so for Cam, Cam has to show something. And again, Cam doesn't have to score 20 points for me. I don't need 20 and 30 points from you. However, I do need to see that, hey, on defense, your guy is, you're creating steals, which he does, relatively well. And he doesn't have to go and beat his chest and run down the court and play with this passion. Would it be nice? Sure. Sure, right?
Yeah.
But you have to make a difference when you're in the game.
Yeah.
Your plus minus has to, we have to see a difference. How are you impacting the game?
Yeah.
And so, and how would you judge it? Would you look at the plus minus? Would you look at, what statistical item would you say, like, hey, all right, well, in order for you to get, additional playing time, we need to see improvement there.
Yeah. So that's a very good point. I agree with that too. It's you do have to look at, something that kind of gives you a good idea of like the contribution they bring to the team. But these things are so tricky sometimes, and I think this is where the Knicks front office they failed like the previous season, like when they brought in Evan Fournier and Kemba Walker. It's with basically trying to gauge how much impact players are having on their squad, and it's really so basically with Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier, it looks like they might have just looked at like the team's ratings, like the offensive rating and defensive rating, while Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier was on the floor, and it was solid, right? But you also, but what then you have to do? You have to look at basically the matchups. You got to see, okay, how much more efficient was Fournier more efficient than the opponent? How much more efficient? And did Fournier basically outscore the opponents over the course of a season by how much? Same thing with Kemba Walker. And when I did it for the when I did that analysis for the Boston Celtics, the team ratings look good, right? But the individual ratings weren't so good. And so then what that implies is like the rest of the team, it was Tatum, Brown, and Smart was carrying Smart and maybe whoever the center was carrying Kemba Walker and Fournier. So but like the front office, they really screwed that up, and it was just like that was really baffling when they brought them on board and then thought like, okay, these are the guys that's going to help us take the next step and get out of the first round. And of course, it was a disaster. But the reason why I say that, not to really focus too much on the front office and that trade, but it's like when you talk about the stats to try to figure out who makes the most impact and who should be starting or who should get the bulk of the rotation minutes, yeah, you have to look at. I think it's both. You have to look at those team ratings, right? And you have to look at the net rating while each individual player is on the floor. But then you also want to look at the individual stats, like the one I was just talking about. Like, did they, did they make more field goals than their matchups, and were they more efficient than their matchup throughout the course of a season? And if it kind of lines up with like what the team rating shows, those net ratings, then yeah, you should probably that person is probably impacting the game, right, on the team level. But if it's a situation where like the individual stats don't look that great, when you look at basically their matchups, but the team stacks look great, then you have to ask yourself, okay, like maybe him, obviously it could be like a, what do you call it, like a chemistry thing that he does bring to the table, but also you have to ask yourself, is it mostly everyone else just carrying that player, and then at that point it may make sense to kind of like uh, test out and check out some other players to see if it works. For me, it's like it's a very difficult decision. It's a difficult decision. I do agree with the coach. I think it's Evan Fournier's uh, position to lose. Quentin Grimes, you brought up his injury, so that he was in a walking boot. Yeah, he was injured quite a bit last year too. So it's like we all love Quentin Grimes, but now like is Quentin Grimes, is his body even cut out for the NBA game? Can he even like last, you know, 80, even 70 games a season? So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. But I think with Quentin Grimes, if he's going to be injury prone, um, I think Fournier for right now, and then you have to see if Cam Reddish can get it together and then like overtake Fournier. But that'd be difficult. They do, like they said, they need some shooting to help spread the floor. But for me, I would prefer if Cam Reddish gives you a better defensive, you know, is better for you on the defensive end. I would probably go with it. But the way the stats look now, it looks like it's Fournier's, and honestly, the way the stats look, I don't even know if the other two can overtake Fournier. Because if like the coaching staff, who they Tibbs looks at a lot of these analytics, and he always talks about matchups. Uh,
Sure.
but actually, you know what? Let me discount that because he'll look at the analytics and still come up with the wrong conclusion. So,
Right.
but it's but it does look right now. It's like Evan Fournier has like a large lead. It's not even really that close because just the overall production is just so much more than like what the other two guys are bringing, what the defenses that they're bringing to the table. 33 more field goals made. The other two are a minus. The other two
Right.
weren't even able to like outscore their matchups throughout the course of a season. And if you discount those 33 field goals by 5%, you're still where you're still like in the high 20s. And there's so it's he still gives you he's still like I hate to say it, I'm not the dude is he's just a stone out there on the court, doesn't move on defense, but he's just right now he's just more effective, and he's gonna give you more production than the rest will, even if you discount his production by what you're losing on the defensive end. You know,
Sure.
so sure. The other battle I wanted to ask you about was like it was more with Obi Toppins and Julius Randle. I think I like
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna toot my own horn a little bit. I think I was the first person in this Knicks universe, like making content to really like, hey, Obi Toppin is actually, I think, is going to be better than Julius Randle. Obi Toppin should be getting more minutes because
Absolutely.
his efficiency, it's like a lot of his metrics are like insane, right? His efficiency is really high. He's shooting like he's the only person who's operates out of the wing who's shooting over 50% on the team. I don't think there's anyone on the team that operates in a wing that's even shooting above 40. Last season, there's nobody who operates in a wing that shot above 41%. I think they all shot 41, 42% or below. It might have been Fournier who had the best shooting percentage. I mean, and Obi was the only other person. He doesn't get a ton of minutes, and so a lot of times we were asking ourselves like, is it just because he's getting fast break points and he's getting dunks, and he's doing it in limited minutes? What is it going to be like if you play him a full game? However, Obi Toppin, we saw like a few games where he was able to play where he was able to play like starting minutes because Julius wasn't there. And every time he played starters minutes, he was actually dropping 18 points. And then the good thing about it too is like these are very erratic schedules, right? So it's not like back to back to back, and so he had a hot streak, and then you don't know if it was just a hot streak. It was like he played early in the season without Julius, and then played like well, actually, I would say more towards the middle of the season, and then he had another game. Maybe he played without Julius, maybe 15 games later, and then towards the end of the season, he had a bunch of games where he played starter minutes. But it's just the fact being able to operate out of the wing and being able to shoot over 50%. Although most of it are dunks, the one thing it kind of shows you is his decision making on the offensive end. It's like
Sure.
So what the person is like getting mostly dunks, right? They stick him out there in the wing, but he's still able to find a way to get dunks and still get layups and things like that. That means he understands how to play basketball. It means he makes good decisions. He's not going to force it. And so I always thought that was a really, that was a very good trait about him. And and then also he was one of the only other players that were getting his teammates layups. If you look at some of the, it wasn't a ton. He didn't have enough. He didn't have a lot of possessions where they weren't like giving it to him like go make a play for your team, but it would be like it's kind of through the course of the offense he was able to find his teammates for like layups, and so to me that's one thing that I always look at because you're getting easy buckets for you're making plays and getting easy buckets for your team, and so that was really good. With Randall, it's like it's just because of the way his game is. He just would have to change his game. I do think he can be a very good, very effective player, but he would just have to change his game. Like when you basically get him, let's say you do a pick and roll, and he has a running, he has a lane to the rim, and yeah, there might be like a couple of people in that lane. Sometimes he'll just start dribbling and wait for the people to come out, and then wait for the double team to come. And although you got him a lane, so or even an open shot, it was kind of crazy. And a lot of that happened, not a lot last year, but I remember a few times that happened, and it was like really baffling to me. It's like, so somebody just got you a wide open shot, and you're just gonna dribble and let someone come up. And so, but the difference between him and Obi, like with Obi Toppin, if he has a lane to the rim and there's a couple of people sitting underneath there, if you're under the rim, good luck. It's like you see he kind of rises through contact, through traffic, and so it's if he can play a little more like Obi, where you get the ball and you just go straight to the rim. He doesn't have the athleticism, but just being a little more efficient in that way with having less usage. Like if somebody makes a play for you and you have an open shot, take it. If you have a lane to the rim, and yeah, there might be one person underneath the rim to basically guard your shot. You got to try to take it and go strong to the rim. If he can do that, I think he can be really good and really effective, and also committing on the defensive end. And so it's really tough, right? I mean, he had like 2 seasons ago, he had like one of the, you know, people kind of like roll their eyes when people like, I would say that Julius Randle, the season he had 2 years ago, was one of the all-time great seasons by a single
Sure.
player. Because one of the things I looked at the statistics. First of all, there's not a lot of people that were averaging over the course of NBA history that average like 24, 10, and 6. I mean, he's like probably one of maybe 5 or 6 players in NBA history to average that. Um, and so just by that alone, that was like one of the all-time great performances. But then also, if you look at basically that metrics where I look at the overall performance game by game versus the team's performance game by game, I mean, he was at like 0.72. The correlation was like a little too high. It was too high for the team, but it just shows he was like he's an engine. He could be an engine for your team, and he was the engine for that squad. And so but I don't know what he's going to give us this season, especially with Jalen Brunson here. For me, I'm hoping they find a way to trade him at some point, but I wouldn't put it past him if he has another great season. To tell you the truth, but it would have to be it would have to be great, a good season that he would have without having the ball in his hand a lot. What do you think about the whole matchup with in terms of the Obi versus Julius? What do you think about that? Like, what do you hope to see out of that?
Yeah, this is always a hot topic.
Yeah.
This is definitely a hot topic. And uh, let me start with here. Let me start with Julius. And I have been skeptical about Julius. Uh, I felt like that year, what was it, the 2 years ago, where he had this amazing year, great statistically. He made second team All NBA. He made his first All Star game. But was watching him, and he just kept turning the ball over, those turnovers and turnovers at critical times.
Yeah.
And then you think about it, how often was he able to hit a game-winning shot? And did you feel comfortable, with 30 seconds left in the game and the ball, Julius is generating the offense. He's being the playmaker. I never felt comfortable with it. And when we went to the playoffs, of course we're all happy, right? Knicks are going to the playoffs as a fourth seed, and we all know we weren't really a fourth seed. I felt like Julius played well during the COVID season. Yeah. And I look at any statistics that occurred on the COVID season where there were no fans. So there was no pressure.
Yes.
If you have 500 or 1,000 fans, 2,000 fans in an arena that can fit 36,000, sure. And that playoff series really was an eye opener for me. I never wanted to extend him and give him, I don't think it was a max contract, but what is it? Well, yeah, it is a max contract. It wasn't a super max. Yeah. And I felt like, after that one season, we didn't have to extend him. It felt like he gave us a discount. He took a little less than what he could have. Mm-hmm. And I felt he showed exactly who he was. Now, the Julius fans will tell you, he got doubled and triple T in that Atlanta Hawks series. That's the reason why, when he would try to pass out of the double T, he wasn't passing to anyone else who was efficient. And I say, I don't know about that. I feel like in that particular series, mm-hmm. There were some double teams, but there were times where he just was flat, just couldn't hit a shot.
Yeah.
And he didn't display true leadership at that time. And I was very skeptical. And then we go into this next season, he's out of shape. He's still making bad decisions. And what's so unfortunate about it is, he's still statistically, he's showing up, 20 points, 10 rebounds. 20 and 10 guy, 20, 10 and 5. And however, it didn't translate to wins.
Yeah.
And so, case in point, when they tried to determine his value, there is none. I mean, what guy in the league right now who's under the 28 and under, age-wise, who's scoring 20 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists a game, you would have to attach a first-round draft pick in order to get rid of him. That speaks volumes in itself.
Yeah, it definitely does. I think part of that is, honestly, I think a lot of that is optics as well as like if you look like you want to get rid of a player, your team wants to get rid of a player. It's almost like like the player is discounted. The value that player brings is discounted, and now all of a sudden they're asking for like first round picks along with the for the trade to happen. But I ended up doing like analysis on basically looking at all the players because I was trying to figure out, okay, how do you value how much a player is worth in a trade market? Like how much talent can you get back, right? When you trade a player, how do you value that? And so the only way I knew was like you need to get like a holistic statistic like PIE or PER, and then just take the PIE. And I looked at it over the course of like something like 8 seasons, and I looked at every player that was traded. I focused only on players where it was mostly movements for picks, or like sometimes there are players attached, but the players attached are not even really, they're kind of like bench players that nobody really cares much about. And so it's almost like fillers. And so I focused on those, and it was like, it seemed like he belonged in a protected pick. Like you should get one protected pick for Julius. But the problem comes in is like when everyone knows you want to get rid of that player. Now, let's say like, the Knicks fans aren't like, they just don't not really, they're not too vocal and they're not putting pressure on the team in terms of Julius. And then and then the team is not actively shopping to see if anyone is interested in Julius. I think if you know, like you, I think you're more likely to get like, people coming by, peeking and be like, hey, I wonder like what Julius can do for us. Maybe he needs a change of scenery. And I just think the act of the team wanting to trade a player that's in Julius's situation automatically discounts, that player's what the value that player brings to the team. I mean, discounts it a lot, but Julius, honestly, yeah, you shouldn't have to attach a first round pick for Julius, but just because of the attitude from last year and
Sure.
and then the efficiency too. That's the other thing. I mean, that's why those 20 points per game. I really don't care about that. Like if you're shooting 20 points, if you're like the combination of him and Barrett, that's 40 points per game, right? But they're shooting 40% from the field. I mean,
Right.
like that is insane. I mean, so just imagine if you were like, let's say, I mean, I wonder, like, I never thought about it, but I wonder what it would be like. You add 4 percentage point. Let's say you add four, you increase the 40 points that they bring to the table. You increase it by 4%, because all you're trying to do is like, can you get them their league average? Like, let's say the league average is shooting at field goal average like 45%. But if you
Okay.
can get them to like 44%, like what does that do? Just increase it by 4%. I mean, I think that's, we win a lot more ball games. We're probably closer to like 50 games, in that situation. But those, 20 points, both of them were averaging. Like, those are very cringeworthy. Like when I see somebody averaging like a lot of points and shooting 40%, that's terrible. Because at that point, you really need to you need to get the ball to someone else, somebody else who's a finisher. You should be looking to get other teammates involved, instead of you
Sure.
forcing it, So but yeah, I'm sorry. What else do you see in terms of like? I mean, how do you think? What do you think Julius would have to do this season to just to improve? Because we need to try to get his trade value up. So at least
Oh, absolutely.
if you can get,
Absolutely.
yeah, if you can trade him. Honestly, in my opinion, uh, feeling like you have to trade Julius and feeling like you need to get a pick back, to me doesn't make any sense, right? Because you picked this guy
Okay.
up from free agency. If you pick somebody up from free agency, honestly, if it's not working out, I think you're hurting your team by then holding on to him like, oh, I want to get something back for him. Because all it
Right.
cost you was cash, right? So
Sure.
really, if you think about it, if you picked them up from free agency and all it cost you was cash and not players, then all you want to do is just trade it for another player who has maybe short-term cash flow, right? Is like who's basically who has a contract that's about to expire, and actually that'll be better for the team. You're trading someone who's like, who's got a long-term cash flow for someone who has short-term uh, negative cash flow. I guess I don't want to get too much into that, but maybe it's not a very good example. But you're all you're doing is just trading cash at that point and players, because
Sure.
that's But if you let's say you drafted someone or you picked up someone from a trade and it cost you, let's say, 2 draft picks, and then you sign that player, then I could understand. It was like, oh man, we basically this costs us 2 first round picks. I can't just trade him for like nothing, right? But if you
Right.
pick him up from free agency, to me, if you can just get whatever you can get from him, it's fine. As long as you don't have to, even if you can attach the protected pick, that's fine too. Because those protected picks, I think they got way too many protected picks, and it's kind of worthless when you have that many. But
Exactly.
what does he have to do to improve this season, Julius Randle?
Okay. Well, there's a couple of things I want to touch on
Hmm.
regarding Julius.
Yeah.
I don't feel like the front office is ready to get rid of him just yet. I feel like because again, if they are giving up on him after one bad season,
Hmm.
it makes it look like buyer's remorse, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like that they obviously put out some feelers to see his value, which you should do about all your players in your team, right? No matter how good or how bad they are, you should, uh, check the pulse and see if, you know, in different trade scenarios, uh, what will we be able to get back in turn? What's the feeling out there? So I think that's what they were doing. Now, I feel like if with Julius, my biggest fear, this is my fear this year. I feel like with Jalen Brunson being on this team, we are going to get a better Julius than we did this previous year. Mm-hmm. But I'm afraid that management is going to want to hold on to him. That's my biggest fear. My fear is that where a lot of the fan base would love to see, okay, well, he's playing better and his trade value is definitely at an all-time high. We need to move on from him. The only way that they're going to move on from Julius is it's all going to be contingent on Obi Toppin's play.
Yeah.
So if Obi comes out and he takes that next step, which I really, really feel he's going to do that. I feel like Obi is that one big player that right now, some think he's a one-trick pony. All he can do is fast break and get his points that way. But if anyone has really did a deep dive on Obi Toppin, you will see that all throughout his career, from high school to college, he has been the underdog player.
Yes.
Every year. And he has made drastic, changes in his game at every level. It just takes, I feel like he's that flower that takes a while to blossom.
Yes.
But once it happens, oh my. And if you look at the game, if you look at statistically, what he has done since the All-Star game, his game has drastically improved. I know he had that one game where Randall was out and barely scored, but then I think Randall was out for 2 games, but that next game he scored 20.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of that is because he's afraid. If you look at Obi, he still has that AAU mentality. And what I mean by that is he's still looking at the coach and he's scared to make a mistake because he's on a short leash.
Yes.
And so he's not able to play with the freedom. Now, does he make some mistakes? Absolutely. Even though he's last year he was a second year player, but he's still going to make those mistakes. It's just unfortunate that he wasn't able to play through them.
Yeah.
And I feel if you look at his 3-point percentage, how that increased, there was some plays I always look at how a player scores and the level of difficulty it is. And I felt like he is getting closer and closer. Like, I don't think he is going to explode next year. I do think year 4 you're going to see. I think each year you're going to see the progression. But I think by the time year 5 gets here, wow, I truly think he has potential to be an all-star. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that. Yeah. I really believe that wholeheartedly. Mm-hmm. And I think in the right system, the right coach, I think he can do it. And what's also great about him now, right now, absolutely, Randall's a better player than Obi Toppin. Let me be clear when I say that. He is definitely right now. When they end their careers, I truly feel that Obi will have the better career. Yeah. And again, we know, the guys who slam dunk, you only can do that for so long, right? You start to decline over the years. In your younger days, we saw the Vince Carters and the Steve Francis, Byron Davis, all those guys, these high flyers, and it was exciting to watch it. But eventually, it declines. So the game has to evolve. And I feel like once he learns how to create his own shot, okay? I mean, if you look at his statistics, and with Amari Stoudemire's statistics in his first 2 seasons, and Amari was fortunate enough to play with Steve Nash, okay? He had a Hall of Famer being able to develop his game. I think you're going to see a lot of similarities in their 2 games. Now, from a defensive side, and that's what if you ask Obi, what he worked on all summer, he said defense and his jump shot. Yeah. So if we see increases in those areas, and I think we get to a point where it's like, hey, you know what? The more playing time, this is a statistic I have to locate it, where they were showing, when Obi gets 10 minutes, how much does he normally score? When he's at 15 minutes, at 20, and at 30, the more minutes, he's more effective.
Yeah.
He's clearly more effective. Now, he needs to work on rebounding as well. I believe his rebounding, because they're turning him into, they're trying to turn him into the corner boy Kevin, sit in the corner and shoot these 3-pointers. He's nowhere near the basket to get a rebound.
Yes.
Let him play under the basket, because he can jump out of the freaking stadium. So there's no excuse for him not to be able to have a higher rebounding percentage. So there's some things that just kind of need to be tweaked. Mm-hmm. But I expect him to have. I feel like he is a better fit for the Knicks than Randall, but Randall is definitely a much better player at this juncture right now. Yeah. So that's kind of where I stand there.
So with in terms of Obi's ability to score, it's the one thing I noticed at first. I felt that it was mostly dunks he was getting, but the one thing is I noticed about him, number one, his ability to kind of like to rise up even through traffic in the lane and finish.
Absolutely.
He's like the only one that can do that on our team. And then the other thing I started seeing as the season went along was Obi actually was driving to the basket. He actually scored a lot, not a ton. The percentage I don't think is that high. It's probably single digits, maybe something like 10%. But as the season went along, Obi was putting the ball on the floor and getting his own buckets. And so the first thing I saw, actually, no, it was mostly like dunks at first, right? Being able to like just kind of finish through traffic and contact with ease. And then the other thing I noticed with him by like December was like Obi was actually he was already putting the ball on the floor and then he was posting people up. So he was actually making his own plays. If you gave him the ball in a post, he would actually post up and get a bucket for you. And so I did see that with Obi. And then by the second half of the season, I felt like when you gave him minutes, the problem with Obi too is like really honestly, Obi was really averaging more like 10 minutes a game, to tell you the truth. He had games where the coach would play him, like, obviously when Julius was out. So a lot of that skewed his statistics. But if you actually look at all the minutes that he played and probably take the median, because I think the stats is he averaged like something like 17 or 18 minutes. But if you look at the median, you look at all the games and the minutes he got, the median is probably going to be more like 12 or 10 minutes. So he didn't like. I think he didn't really play a lot of minutes all the time or enough minutes all the time, and so because of that, you're not able to see him like he's not getting the chance to like put the ball on the floor. You only see him maybe on a fast break, and it's really very few possessions you see him, right? And so, but I think his game is starting to round out. He can definitely post up. I know that for sure, and so he can create his shots that way. And then by the end of the season, I was seeing him put the ball on the floor like a lot. And then he ended the season. If you remember, he ended the season dropping 35 points. I think it was on the Wizards. Oh, was it 36? And then he dropped 42 on the Raptors. And then the thing for me, that 42 he dropped was impressive. People were saying, "Oh, Van Fleet wasn't there, and Siakam wasn't there." But that rookie of the year that they had in there was playing, and they had the rest of their squad, and that's a good long team right there that plays really good defense. I think Obi was playing too, Obi. So that's a very good defensive squad, and the fact that he was able to drop 42 on that squad, I thought that was extremely impressive as well. So um, I think with Obi, you just got to play him if you want to see him. But I agree with you; he needs to work on the rebounding. I think that's what's getting his way. It's funny that you said that because also the interview that Knicks Fan TV did with like Alan Hahn, he was saying that basically if he wants to play, he needs to focus on not leaking out all the time. But he needs to focus on not leaking out all the time, but getting the rebound first, and then he can fly if he wants to. And it seems like honestly, with that guy Alan Hahn, I don't. A lot of what he says is, you can't believe everything people say. And then also he works for MSG, so a lot of things he says is going to be skewed. However, he does have inside. He's one of the few people that have inside knowledge, and the way he was saying like, if Obi just gets more rebounds, he's going to play more. I have a feeling it's basically he's already talked to Tibbs and he's talked to people, and they know why refuses to play him, and Tibbs doesn't want to play him because of the whole rebounding. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I think it's rebounding also, from a defense too. I think from a defense perspective, but that can be worked on. You have a kid who wants to get better and who wants to play better, who wants to play, and he's hungry. And I like that. And he has obviously we know he has a high motor, right? Which we know that's something you cannot coach. You cannot. You either have it or you don't. And obviously there was something they saw in him when they drafted him initially. Because I mean, that was to me it was like, well, why are we drafting a power forward when we have Julius?
Because they wanted to trade Julius.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was the plan. And then Julius came in that year and played lights out. The Knicks went to the playoff. They signed Julius to this lucrative contract, and here we are.
Yeah. Honestly, yeah, like touching on what you said when you were talking about the Julius contract, obviously in hindsight, I'm with you 100%. But in the moment, um, I really felt like they were doing the right thing, signing Julius. But in hindsight, looking at it now, you were 100% right. And then honestly, the front office should have known better too, right? They should have done, because like I totally forgot it was a contract year for him for the most part, and so that's why. And then of course the empty stadiums, and they just didn't keep that in mind. I think a better front office. You know what a better front office would have done? Oh yeah, and then also because of that, it, like there's a lot of noise coming from your side. It's like everything all right?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
But yeah, so the other thing was the way Obi showed in that first play. He didn't get a lot of minutes, so it wasn't like he was like crazy showing out because he was only playing like maybe 8 to 10 minutes in that playoff game. However, the way he came out playing in that playoff game is like it was clear he was like the only person on that team. Like, holy crap, this kid like he's like the bright lights kind of dude. Like he likes a performance. He likes the crowd. He's like an entertainer. He's actually the kind of guy. If there's a crowd there, he's showing out. And
Absolutely.
and the more pressure the crowd brings, the more he loves it. And so that's the one thing I noticed in that first playoff run, that first playoff series we had with the Hawks. That said, it's like I think this front office they should have had more faith, like Inobi, number one, and number two, they should have traded Julius instead of signing him at that point after that second team. And you know what everybody would have said? Like they were worried about the optics. Everybody would have been like, "Oh my God, what is this team doing? This is crazy. You guys have like an All NBA player, and you guys trade him." And they're gonna be like, "This is why the Knicks will never amount to anything." But you know what would have happened? The Knicks would have had another winning season because they would have been playing Obi, and Obi would. He's just a better fit for this team. And if they would have played Obi last season, also they would have had to also play Quickly more. Quickly did pick it up towards the end of the season, but that would have been the key. Actually, the key would have been they should have started Quickly earlier in the season. They should have been, like once they shut down Kemba Walker the first time around, Quickly should have been starting. But if they had Quickly and Obi in that starting lineup, I think they would have made the play-in. That's just my opinion from at least from what the stats look like. I think they would have made the plan, but it was just on the front office. I think the front office. This is why I think the front office is not as great as some people think they are. There are some good things about them. I like the kind of like the carefulness they are trying to build the team because they are very thoughtful in their approach. But a lot of some of the decisions are just wrong. They've made mistakes, and so we already talked about the whole Kevin Walker, Evan Fournier thing. But you touched on a Julius Randle one, and I think that was a huge mistake. A better front office, most really good front offices that you hear about, all-time great front offices and teams, they always trade a star player that like outperform on a contract season, and everybody's like, "What the hell are they doing?" And then come to find out, it's like, oh, and a season later, then everybody's like, "Well, it looks like they knew what they were doing," and so,
Absolutely.
but that's how you have a good front office. But this front office, I do think they worried a little too much about um, how things look, and because I don't know, because they're very concerned about being able to cover themselves and like selling decisions that they make. They want to be able to sell it to the owner and also the fan base, and so I think that that's pretty much an issue for them. Um, so we've actually gone on. I think we're at like an hour and a half maybe right now, and so I'm thinking probably we definitely want to do this again. I think this it went really well, and I really appreciate a lot of what you brought to the table. Um, but is there anything you wanted to promote? Any websites or even like channels you wanted to promote? If you want to talk about it.
No, I don't have anything I want to promote, but one last thing I do want to touch on. I know we have spoke, as I know we're getting ready to wrap things up.
Yeah.
Jalen Brunson
Yes.
and playing alongside Luka. So I think there were 17 games where Jalen Brunson uh, played without Luka, and he averaged 20 points, and 7.5 assists and 3.9 rebounds outside of Luka.
Yes.
And those are great stats.
Yes.
Those are great stats. And I feel like even at that price, this year, I gasp for air. But in all honesty, that was a great signing, and I feel like that is going to be the difference maker this year. It's going to be him. He is that engine what we've been looking for, that consistency, that even keelness.
Yes.
And I feel like the Knicks are going to turn a page. And I'm just hoping that Julius will figure out a way to play within this system. And we don't need him being a point forward anymore. I don't think we ever needed it.
Thank goodness.
And so the more we can take the ball out of his hands, I think he'll play better as well. But again, a lot of it's going to be contingent on what happens with Obi. If Obi takes that next step, then I think you will see, and Julius plays well. I think that'll be the only way that you'll see an actual trade occur.
I agree with you. Honestly, if Obi doesn't like, and it seems like they're just more concerned about Obi's like a little more of improvement on the defense and then also the rebounding. If they trade Obi, Obi is going to be an all-star. I think, in my opinion, I think he's going to be an all-star. And I think it's going to be something they're going to regret trading if they trade him. And I think, honestly, if they trade him, he's going to have wherever he goes, he's going to have an immediate impact. And the Knicks are going to be sort of like in middle of the road, sort of. And I think Dolan is going to clean house. So I think if they're not careful, I know they feel like every front office gets at least gets more than one coach, at least gets to pick up another coaching. But I think unfortunately because they waited too long, you can't basically, if you have a 5-year contract right with Dolan and you knew the coach is like screwing up year two, and you knew, okay, maybe the coach has set like a foundation, a baseline, kind of like also a culture for this team. Now we know these kids are hard worker because he's kind of brought that to the table. So that's like a lasting legacy. At least Tips can leave, but then everything else is like isn't very good. And if they don't make that switch early enough, and then they try to make, let's say they try to like make the switch at the end of this season, I don't know. I think Dolan might be like, yeah, no, you guys don't get another coach. He's like, he might be like, I just prefer to clean. I prefer like to start off all new, like with all new people. But Or maybe he doesn't. Maybe he just, basically he might just get rid of Leon Rose and then and ask for someone else to be at the helm, and then and keep everyone else. But then maybe request that whoever they bring fire Thibodeau. You know. So I don't think they have a lot of room. I think they haven't left themselves a lot of room, and it looks like from the looks of it, it seems like they're all in the same boat and they're gonna go down together with the ship, which is admirable. But it may not be the best thing for this team, unfortunately. It might be actually holding the team back if that's what they're doing. But before we actually drop off, uh, I did. So one thing I was doing was basically just to get more subscribers and also to get more return viewers and people that are a little more that can engage more with the channel. I'm actually giving away like a free ticket to MSG. I don't know if you saw that promotion, but I'm that's what I'm doing essentially. So basically,
That's awesome.
yeah,
That's awesome.
if the requirement is like they would have to subscribe publicly so I can confirm that they subscribe and do the notification and then also send me an email with their name and their email address, and that's pretty much it. That's what they have to do to qualify, and then I'm just gonna do a draw, just randomly pick who just do a random pick, and then like whoever wins, just probably gonna announce it on our next show, the next show that we do together, and and the person gets to pick whatever game they want to watch, and I'll just get the ticket for them. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And before we go, everyone who's watching, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and we'll talk to you guys again soon. Thank you so much.